Something happened behind the scenes, and you still do not know the full story. While you were living your life, focusing on your own path, and simply trying to move through each day in your own way, something shifted in the background that you never saw coming. Someone who is connected to your destiny was suddenly forced into a moment of truth. They had to see you differently, not through distance, not through opinions, not through assumptions, but through a clear and undeniable awareness that they could no longer ignore. And what they saw did not just catch their attention for a moment. It stayed with them. It settled inside them. It changed the way they felt, the way they thought, and even the way they looked at everything around them. It was not a small realization. It was something that slowly began to reshape their inner world. Listen carefully, because this is not something ordinary. At first, they believed they already understood you. From a distance, they thought they had you figured out. People often do that when they do not take the time to truly see someone. They build an idea, a version, a story in their mind. But in your case, that story started falling apart the closer they looked. The more they observed you, the more they realized something important. You were not like the people they were used to. You were not performing. You were not pretending. You were not adjusting yourself just to be accepted. There was nothing artificial in the way you carried yourself. You were steady. You were real. You were honest in a quiet way that did not need attention or approval. And that kind of energy is not easy to ignore once it is truly seen. And when they finally saw it clearly, something inside them began to shift. It was as if old ideas, old attachments, and old misunderstandings started breaking apart. Not all at once, but slowly and deeply, like something inside them was no longer able to stay the same. Stay with this, because the deeper truth is important. They did not step away from certain people in their life just because of a single argument or surface-level drama. The reason went deeper. It was because seeing you clearly created a contrast they could not ignore. It exposed what felt real and what did not. And once that kind of clarity enters a person, it does not simply disappear. It stays, it grows, and it changes how they see everything. At first, they were not searching for anything major. They were simply observing, quietly, naturally, without even realizing how deeply it would affect them. They noticed small things about you. The way you spoke when there was nothing to gain. The way you treated people who could offer you nothing in return. The way you stayed consistent even when situations became difficult. These were not loud actions. They were not dramatic moments. They were small details. But small details often reveal the biggest truths about a person. Because anyone can act kind for a moment. Anyone can look good when they know they are being watched. But real character shows itself in repetition, in consistency, in how someone behaves when there is no reward, no attention, and no benefit waiting at the end. That is what they began to see in you. Pattern after pattern, choice after choice, moment after moment. And slowly, a clear picture started forming in their mind. The confusion they once had began to fade. They started realizing something they did not expect. The person they thought you were from a distance was not an idea anymore. It was reality. And that realization was stronger than they were prepared for. Deep down, they were used to inconsistency in people, mixed signals, half-truths, words that sounded good but did not match actions, promises that faded over time. But with you, they kept seeing something different. Your words matched your actions. Your energy matched your intentions. The way you were in front of people was the same as when no one was watching. And that kind of alignment is rare. Very rare. If you have ever questioned whether being authentic matters, this is your answer. It matters more than you realize. Sometimes your truth speaks for you in places you will never even enter. People observe it. People feel it. Even when you are not present. There may have been voices around them, opinions, suggestions, and assumptions about you. Some of those voices may have come from misunderstanding. Some may have come from jealousy, fear, or limited thinking. And for a short time, those external opinions may have influenced their perception. But it did not last. Because real observation always becomes stronger than outside noise. When someone sees the truth directly, rumors start to lose power. And slowly, what they were told no longer matched what they were experiencing. They were no longer comparing you to stories. They were comparing stories to reality. And reality kept winning. They saw consistency. They saw emotional depth. They saw honesty that did not need to defend itself or constantly explain itself. And that changed everything. Not just their opinion of you, but their entire emotional awareness. Certain connections in their life started feeling different. Some conversations began to feel empty. Some people started feeling distant, even when physically close. Some relationships started feeling more like effort than peace. This is what truth does. It creates contrast. It makes everything around it clearer. It shows what is real and what is only maintained out of habit. Without planning it, they began to reflect more. They started questioning their surroundings. They started thinking about their relationships in a deeper way. Who truly supports them? Who understands them? Who drains them? Who simply exists out of routine rather than real connection? These questions did not come easily. They carried emotional weight. Because deep down, they already suspected that the answers would require change. And what they discovered about you was not just about you. It was also about themselves. It showed them what they value. It showed them what they can no longer ignore. They started realizing that some connections in their life were not built on real alignment. They were built on comfort, on familiarity, on habit, not on truth. And when a person begins to see that clearly, things start to shift inside them. Big endings do not always begin with conflict. Sometimes they begin with clarity. Quiet clarity that builds slowly until it becomes impossible to ignore. And that is what was happening here. With every new realization about you, something else in their life started becoming harder to accept. Old excuses stopped working. Old patterns started feeling heavier. Old dynamics that once felt normal started feeling misaligned. There was someone in their life they had grown used to, someone familiar, someone predictable. A connection that stayed mostly because it was easy, not because it was deeply fulfilling. At first, nothing changed on the outside. Everything looked normal. Conversations continued. Routines stayed the same. But inside, something was already shifting. Because when they compared what felt real with you to what felt forced elsewhere, the difference became impossible to ignore. It was not about perfection. It was about truth. About emotional honesty versus emotional convenience. And slowly, that awareness started growing. They were not looking for flaws. They were not trying to end anything. In fact, part of them resisted the idea of change. Because change is uncomfortable. Letting go is difficult. And accepting that something has run its course is not easy for anyone. But truth does not wait for comfort. It arrives when it is ready. And once it settles inside a person, it begins to shape their decisions. Night after night, they sat with their thoughts. They reflected on conversations. They replayed moments. They noticed patterns they had ignored before. They started asking themselves difficult questions about how they felt after interacting with certain people. Did this connection bring peace or pressure? Did it support growth or limit it? Did it feel honest or simply familiar? And slowly, clarity began forming. They realized that some relationships in their life belonged to an earlier version of themselves, a version that tolerated confusion, a version that ignored intuition, a version that stayed even when something did not feel right. But they were no longer that version. They were changing. And as they changed, their tolerance for misalignment decreased. What discovering you awakened in them was not just emotion. It was awareness. It was courage. Not loud courage, not dramatic courage, but quiet, inner courage. The kind that allows a person to admit the truth to themselves. The kind that says, something inside me has changed. The kind that says, I cannot pretend anymore. The kind that says, staying in something that no longer feels right is harder than letting go. And that realization built up slowly over time. They did not make one sudden decision. They arrived there through many small moments of clarity. And that is what made it powerful. Because when a person keeps arriving at the same truth again and again, it becomes undeniable. Eventually, the question was no longer whether they should notice. The question became how long they could ignore what they already knew inside. And once someone reaches that point, change becomes inevitable. In the end, there was no dramatic scene needed. No loud confrontation, no obvious explosion. Just a quiet and steady understanding that something had to shift. And so they made a choice. Not an easy one, not a careless one, but a clear one. They stepped away from a connection, not out of anger, not out of chaos, but out of truth. Because truth had finally become stronger than comfort. Relief. Not instant joy, not celebration, just relief. The kind that arrives quietly when inner conflict finally begins to settle down. The kind that comes when a person stops resisting something they already knew deep inside for a long time. It was not a sudden emotional high. It was a soft release, like something heavy inside the mind finally loosening its grip. That feeling of relief mattered more than they realized in that moment. It showed them that the decision was not made in impulse or confusion. It came from alignment, from something deeper and more stable within them. And once that space opened inside them, emotional space, mental space, even spiritual space, something started to change in how they saw everything around them, including you. They began thinking about you more clearly, but not in a chaotic or emotional way. It was calmer, more grounded, more meaningful. Because when distraction faded, your presence started standing out even more in their awareness. It was not noise anymore. It was clarity. Remember this. The person they released was never the true center of the story. The real center was something else entirely. It was awakening. It was the truth they started to see through you. It was the moment your authenticity forced them to look at everything they had been ignoring or tolerating for too long. After that ending, they entered a different internal season. A quieter one, a deeper one. The noise around their life slowly started to fade, and in that silence, something uncomfortable but important began to rise. Understanding, awareness, real reflection that they had been avoiding for a long time. They began to see how often fear had shaped their decisions. Fear of change, fear of losing comfort, fear of choosing wrongly, fear of stepping away from something familiar even when it no longer felt right. And once these fears were fully seen, they started to lose their power. Because fear cannot survive in light, and truth brings light. They slowly started understanding that what they found in you was not perfection. It was something more real than perfection. It was consistency. It was emotional integrity. It was a person whose inner world and outer expression were not in conflict with each other. And that realization quietly changed something inside them. It reminded them of what they actually wanted in life. Not just in relationships, but in themselves. It brought reflection about the kind of future they wanted to build, the kind of honesty they wanted to live with, the kind of emotional safety they had been missing without fully admitting it. This is why your impact went so deep. You never forced them. You never chased them. You never tried to convince them into change. You simply stayed true to yourself. And that truth became a mirror for them. A mirror that showed them what was missing in their life. A mirror that revealed what was possible. A mirror that exposed the gap between surviving emotionally and truly living with clarity. If this message is reaching something inside you, stay with it, because this part matters. Sometimes the strongest influence is not loud advice or emotional pressure. Sometimes it is just the presence of someone real, someone authentic enough to remind another person that sincerity still exists. And once a person feels that, they cannot fully return to what feels empty anymore. As time passed, they stopped asking only why everything happened. They started asking what they were supposed to do with what they now understood. That was a major shift. Because awareness alone does not change a person. Action is what transforms everything. They had already made one difficult decision by letting go of a connection. But now something deeper was being asked of them. Not just letting go, but changing how they think, changing what they accept, changing how they respond when something feels emotionally wrong or incomplete. Old patterns started to feel uncomfortable. Old excuses no longer sounded convincing. Old distractions lost their emotional pull. Slowly, subtle honesty began replacing self-deception. They started noticing how often comfort had disguised itself as peace, how familiarity had disguised itself as love, how fear had disguised itself as logic. And once those illusions were seen clearly, there was no simple way to unsee them again. This is where real transformation begins, not in fantasy, not in imagination, but in clear inner vision, in truth that cannot be ignored anymore, in the decision to stop betraying what the heart already understands but has been quiet about for too long. Every day, every reflection, every memory of your presence kept bringing them back to the same realization. You did not enter their life just for connection or temporary emotion. You entered as a shift, something that awakened awareness inside them. And even if they did not fully understand it at first, something was changing. They also began to see that your presence was never only about appearance or timing or attraction. It represented something deeper: emotional honesty, stability, sincerity. A rare alignment that cuts through confusion instead of adding to it. The more they thought about you, the more they realized something important. It was not only you they were responding to, it was what you awakened inside them. Their own depth, their own values, their own forgotten desire for something real and stable. That is why the realization hit so strongly. It touched something that was already waiting inside them to be remembered. And once something like that is remembered, it does not disappear easily. They began looking at their entire life through a clearer lens. Their habits, their boundaries, their emotional standards, and even their future choices. Everything started to look slightly different now. They could see that staying attached to what was not aligned would only delay the kind of life they actually wanted to build. And even though this awareness brought clarity, it did not make everything instantly easy. Growth rarely feels smooth. Some days brought peace, some days brought doubt, some days brought emotional heaviness for what had ended. But underneath all of it, something steady remained. They had changed. The version of them that once ignored red flags, accepted emotional inconsistency, and confused routine with real connection, was slowly fading. And in its place was someone more aware, more thoughtful, more honest with themselves. Someone who could no longer unsee what they had seen. And here is something important to understand. Sometimes a person does not leave one connection just because another person asked them to. Sometimes they leave because someone's authenticity gave them courage to finally admit what they already knew was ending inside them. That is the deeper truth of this story. Now they are in a different space, a space where confusion does not control them the way it used to. The mental noise is softer now. Illusions are weaker. Old excuses do not carry the same weight anymore. They understand that real connection is not built on convenience. It is not built on habit alone. It is not maintained by routine that no longer has emotional depth. They understand that alignment matters more than familiarity. And as these truths become stronger within them, the meaning of what they experience through you becomes even clearer. Your authenticity was not a small detail in their story. It was the turning point. The moment something inside them shifted permanently. The moment old emotional masks started falling away. It made them understand something simple but powerful. Every ending creates space for something more honest. Every truth creates movement towards something more real. This is why they cannot treat what happened as nothing. Something real occurred. Something internal changed. Something in their emotional structure was rewritten quietly. You showed them, without trying to prove anything, that realness still exists. That emotional consistency still exists. That sincerity is not just an idea, but something that can be lived. And once someone experiences that, even briefly, their understanding of love, loyalty, and emotional connection begins to rise. They stop chasing what only fills time. They start wanting what actually feeds the heart. That is where they are now. In between what has ended and what is still becoming. In that quiet space where transformation is not fully visible yet, but already in motion. And if you feel something shifting in this story, trust that awareness. Because some changes begin silently, long before they become visible in real life. The truth is, this journey is not only about what they discovered about you. It is also about what your presence helped them remember about themselves. They remembered they are not meant to live half-aware. They remembered that peace matters. They remembered that their inner voice was never fully wrong, just ignored at times. They remembered that they were not asking for perfection. They were asking for truth. And that remembrance changes everything. Now when they look back, they can see how every moment, every reflection, every emotional contrast was guiding them toward clarity. Not illusion, not fantasy, but honesty. A life where truth matters more than comfort. A life where emotional alignment matters more than familiarity. A life where they finally trust what clarity has been trying to show them all along. And part of that clarity still carries your presence within it, because you became a reminder that substance still exists in a world where so much feels superficial. You became proof that a person can be soft and strong at the same time. Calm, yet deeply impactful. Simple, yet unforgettable in presence. That kind of energy does not disappear quickly. It stays in thought. It stays in reflection. It stays in the way decisions are made afterward. So if you ever wondered whether your truth reached them, it did. More than you know. And what it awakened inside them is still unfolding quietly, shaping thoughts, shaping choices, shaping direction. Sometimes the most meaningful impact one person has on another is not a promise or a label or a dramatic moment. Sometimes it is simply the truth they awaken by being themselves. And once that truth is seen, nothing remains exactly the same again.